Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back, guys, to Magic. This is Hunter and David. Say what up, David.
Yo, what's going on?
We are back. This time, we are going to take a look at David's upgrade to the Legends Legacy Precon Commander deck from Dominaria United. We've already seen the $100 list that David did. If you haven't seen that already, please go down in the description down below. Click that link and you'll see some of David's awesome upgrades to make it a little more budget friendly. But this is the big boy edition. This is where we give him $300 and he makes this deck hum a little more than normal. So, David, let's start us off by talking about what you're doing with the commander itself first. Take it away.
So, if you didn't watch the $100 video, I did decide to switch up the commander. Instead of using the face Planeswalker of the deck, I'm going to use Shanid Sleeper Scourge. This is a red and a white and a black. It's a legendary creature, human knight, 2/4 with menace. It says other legendary creatures you control have menace. It also says whenever you play a legendary land or cast a legendary spell, you draw a card and lose 1 life.
All right, so you're going to be playing a bunch of legendary stuff, drawing cards, and maybe losing some life?
Most certainly losing some life. Essentially, the entire point of this deck is that we're going to be using our commander as a draw engine, just to make sure that we're constantly being able to kind of cantrip off of our creatures, making sure that we're going to be continuously drawing into new threats, and then hopefully also use our commander's menace ability to just kind of beat face and then win through combat damage.
Well, I'm excited to see these new threats. So let's start us off with the additions. David, what are we adding to make this deck better?
So, real quick, before we do dive into that, I do want to go ahead and mention that this $300 upgrade is going to be expanding on the $100 upgrade. As you can see currently on the screen, here is a list of the additions that we made previously to the $100 upgrade.
Yeah, and once again, if you wanted to see why he added all of these cards into the deck to begin with, again, down in the description, click that button, check it out. But that's the 100. Now we're the 300. What are we adding now?
So we already have a fairly solid plan whenever it comes to our just general card draw. Our commander is going to be hopefully doing a pretty decent job of that. I did want to expand on the card draw aspect though. So the first 2 cards I'm going to talk about are really going to be included in the deck for that job. The first one here is Timna the Weaver. This is a white and a black for a total of 3 mana. She's a legendary creature, human cleric, a 2/2 with lifelink. And it says at the beginning of your post combat main phase, you may pay X life, where X is the number of opponents that were dealt combat damage this turn. If you do, draw X cards. Essentially, the game plan with this is that you can either just attack one of opponent just to kind of bully them, or you can spread the love a little bit. And if you do, you'll be able to draw a couple extra cards that way. Same thing with our commander. We are going to be paying life for us to draw cards, but Timna does have lifelink on her, so she helps to mitigate that to some extent. Mungar, the diplomat, is also going to fill in with our card draw here. He is 3 and a white for a legendary creature, human cleric. He's a 2/4 with lifelink. It says whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. So doesn't really hurt us, but he also has that lifelink there. Same thing with Temna. Hopefully can help to mitigate the damage that we're going to be dealing to ourselves with our commander.
Yep, 2 very good legendary creatures, really good at drawing cards.
If you did watch the $100 upgrade, you'll know that we already started to feed into the combat matters. The next 2 cards I'm going to talk about really care about adding into those combats. So the first one here is Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. She is 4 a red and 2 white for a total of 7 mana. She is a legendary creature angel. She's a 5/5 with flying and first rank. She says if a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, that source deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. And if a source would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent half that damage rounded up. So she is the most expensive creature that we have in the deck. In fact, she's actually just the most expensive spell we have in the deck. But her ability to very quickly close out games is incredible. And her ability to just allow us to start swinging in without any kind of fear of blowback because she's going to be mitigating half that damage is really, really nice. Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice, is also here in the deck. She is 2 a red and a white for a total of 4 mana. She's a legendary creature angel. She is a 2/5 with flying and mentor. For those of you who don't remember mentor is a mechanic that says whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. So sadly, she's not going to really hit much in the deck, but she does have another really relevant ability though. And this one it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to one target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains trample if it's red and vigilance if it's white. We have a lot of multicolored creatures in this deck, so she'll be able to not only just be able to hit a red creature, but chances are she'll be able to use both of those abilities on the single creature. Make sure that we double up on it.
Some very mean attack triggering Boros cards coming into the deck. I like it. What else we got?
So these next kind of cards I just want to include in here because I thought they had some really interesting synergy or just kind of help to expand in other avenues of the deck. The first one here is Michiko Kanda, Truth Seeker. She is 3 and a white for a legendary creature human advisor, a 2/2, and she says whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, that player sacrifices a permanent. So super, super nasty and really hopes to just kind of pillow fort you a little bit. Grenzo Havoc Razor is 2 red mana for a legendary creature Goblin Rogue. He's a 2/2, and he says that whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, choose 1. The first mode here says go target creature that player controls. The second mode says exile the top card of that player's library until end of turn. You may cast that card, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So really cool ability here. He potentially could leave our opponents open for an attack for the following turn if we start goading all of their things. Or he could potentially kind of fuel our card draw as well. So very, very cheap at only 2 mana. Super relevant abilities here. I really love Grenzo. The last creature that we're going to include in this pile is Winota, Joiner of Forces. She is 2, a red and a white for a legendary creature human warrior. She's a 4/4 and says whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, although not card draw, and sadly she won't be triggering our commander, she does have the ability to be able to grab some pretty nasty things and put them directly into play, tapped attacking. And of course, that indestructible clause is going to help to make sure that we're dealing some extra damage there too.
Yeah, Winota's a great way to cheat in cards.
As far as just continuing the general good stuff, I did want to include both Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes in this list. They're some of my favorite white creatures. If I have a commander that I feel like really needs to be in play in order for the deck to hum, I will throw these in, assuming I'm playing in white. Giver of Runes for a single white mana is a 1/2 that you can tap. It says another target creature you control gains protection from colorless or from the color of your choice until end of turn. Mother of Runes similarly is a single white mana for a 1/1. She has the ability to tap, and it says target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. We can use these both to defend our creatures. We can also use them to be able to force and make sure that we're going to be dealing combat damage by making our creature gain protection from the color choice of what our opponent's blockers would be. Esper Sentinel is a single white mana for an artifact creature human soldier. It's a 1/1 and it says whenever an opponent casts their first non creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. A nice little card draw option here. Now, sadly, none of these creatures are going to be legendary, so they're not going to trigger our commander, but I do think that they either warrant either the card draw for Esper Sentinel or the protection factor with either of Mother or Giver, just to be able to kind of like warrant their role in the deck.
Being a white player myself, these three are so good. So, so good.
I did want to make sure that we had a little bit more ramp in this deck. Playing in Mardu doesn't really give you the most access to ramp. So the first card here is going to be Dark Ritual. For a single black mana, you get an instant that says add 3 black mana to your mana pool. This card, although not super important in the deck, I will say does allow you to reach for some of those more expensive spells. And it also potentially helps you to get your commander out a little bit early with that extra mana. Jessica's Will is going to fulfill a similar role here. It is 2 and a red for a sorcery. It says choose 1. If you control your commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. The first mode on this card says add a red for each card in target opponent's hand. And the second mode says exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So ramp and card draw.
Okay, those are some pretty good ones. I see here that you might have some enchantments you're adding. What are we adding?
So we are going to be adding 2 enchantments into the deck. The first one here is going to be Whip of Erebos. This is 2 and 2 black for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary artifact enchantment. It says creatures you control have lifelink. Now, that alone probably gives it just like the reason to be in the deck because we are going to be hurting ourselves pretty regularly with our commander. This makes sure that any damage that we're going to be dealing with all of our wonderful menace creatures comes back in the form of life for us. In addition to that, in the case that some of our opponents do get a little bit heavy with the creature destruction, we can always use a second ability on Whip of Erebos, which is 2 and 2 black for a total of 4. You can tap it and return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. You do exile it at the beginning of the next end step, and if it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. You can also only activate this anytime you can cast a sorcery, but that's fine. We're going to be activating this during our first main phase to be able to get an additional creature in. That way we can swing, gain some extra life, and deal a little bit of extra damage. The second enchantment that I'm going to include here is Smothering Tithe. This is 3 and white for an enchantment. It says whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If that player doesn't, you create a treasure token. This is probably one of the best pieces of ramp in the entire format, and most certainly the best white piece of ramp.
Couldn't agree more. Smothering Tithe is like a staple in every single deck ever since it was printed. That runs white, that is.
Yeah, if you're playing a white deck, you should probably be playing this card. The last artifact we're going to include in here is Shadow Spear. This is a single generic mana for our legendary artifact equipment. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. It also says you can pay 1 mana, permanents your opponent's control, lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and you can equip it for 2 mana. Now, the reason why I want to include this is because it does also have that additional lifelink clause in there. That way we can help to mitigate some of the damage we're going to deal to ourselves. This is also a legendary artifact, so it will be able to proc the ability on our commander and allow us to draw an additional card based off of that. Plus, it gives us a nice little pump there with the +1/+1 and lifelink. The last little thing here is in the case that we do have opponents that are going to be playing around with some hexproof or indestructible creatures, Shadow Spear, although kind of a weird card, does allow us to deal with those permanents.
Yeah, Shadow Spirit. I love the flexibility of it, saying nope. And what other lands are you adding into the deck, Dave?
So we did have a little bit of room left with inside the budget, and this is a 3-color deck, so I do think it's important for us to be able to address the mana base. Now, this isn't the worst mana base of any pre-constructed deck I've ever seen, but it is far from a fully functioning 3-color mana base. We're going to try and make it as good as possible. The first card that I'm going to include in here is Flagstones of Trocare. This one is a legendary land. You can tap it to add a white mana. It also says whenever it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for a Plains card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. You're probably never actually going to use that ability. The reason why this card is included in the deck is because it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. It can immediately tap for a white mana, and it's a legendary land, which means whenever we play it, if our commander's in play, we'll lose 1 life and draw a card, which is great for our lands. Luxury Suite and Vault of Champions are both going to be included in here. These both say that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more opponents. Luxury Suite can tap for either a red or a black, and Vault of Champions can tap for either a white or a black. Clifftop Retreat and Isolated Chapel are both going to be making the cut here as well. They say that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control one of the 2 basic lands of the colors that they tap for. So Clifftop Retreat can tap for either a red or a white, and Isolated Chapel can tap for either a white or a black. The last card we're going to be including here for this $300 upgrade is going to be Sulphurous Springs, which is a freshly reprinted card right from Dominaria United. This is one of the pain lands. It says you can tap and add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap and add either a black or a red, and it'll deal 1 damage to you. I actually really love these pain lands because of their flexibility, and for the most part, in the later portions of the game, they're probably not going to hurt you because you can just start to tap them for colorless at that point.
Yeah, I feel like the pain land you added there at the end was a little nod to you loving Rakdos.
Absolutely. Well, the deck actually already does include some.
I'm just playing with you. All right, David, those are all of your additions. Let's talk about the sad part. You gotta make room for all your new toys. So you gotta throw away all the old ones. What are we getting rid of?
So first things first, this is the $300 upgrade, and for the purposes of this video and this deck tech, I really just wanted to expand on the 100. I feel like the deck is pretty straightforward. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is just showcase all of the cards that we removed for the $100 upgrade.
And once again, if you want to know why David removed all of them, click the link down below. and it explains it in that video.
Now, as far as some cards that I did cut for the $300 video, I have a group of cards that I just wasn't super impressed with. The first one here is Captain Lannery Storm. She is 2 and a red for a legendary creature human pirate. She's a 2/2 with haste and says whenever she attacks, you create a treasure token. She says you can sacrifice a treasure and she gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Coming in at 3 mana for a 2/2 is not great, even with the haste factor. I'm not expecting this deck to play super aggressively, more so of a mid range. So Captain Lannery Storm might only be able to actually swing in once or at most possibly twice before she ends up getting blocked and killed. Ashling Pilgrim is 1 and a red for a legendary creature, Elemental Shaman. It's a 1/1 on its own with a mana sink. You can pay 1 and a red to put a +1/+1 counter on Ashling Pilgrim. It says if it's the third time this ability is resolved this turn, you remove all +1/+1 counters from it, and it deals that much damage to each creature and each player. I don't usually care much for this kind of an ability because this is going to be a lot for us to feed into a small board wipe. It doesn't actually kill everything. It costs a ton, and it could also kill our own board. So I'm not really a big fan of Ashling Pilgrim. Alicia, who smiles at death, is kind of a weird include for the precon. She is 2 and a red for a legendary creature human warrior, a 3/2 with first strike. She says that whenever she attacks, you can pay a white black or a white black. If you do, return target creature card with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. I feel like this card is a little bit weird because there's not actually a whole lot of creatures that this can hit. Anafinza, Kindry Spirit, is 2 white mana for a 2/2. She's a legendary creature spirit soldier. It says whenever another non token creature enters the battlefield under your control, bolster 1. For those of you who don't remember, she says for the bolster, choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you control and put a +1/+1 counter on it. I'm not really here for it. And coming in at double white actually makes her kind of surprisingly difficult to cast. Moira Urborg Haunt is a new card for this deck, but sadly, she's going to get the cut. She is 2 and a black for a legendary creature, Spirit Wizard, a 3/2 with Menace. Says whenever she deals combat damage to a player, return to the battlefield, target creature card in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn. The recursion aspect on her is nice, but given our commander's ability to give our other legendary creatures Menace, means they're going to be a pain in the butt to block. I don't really expect Moira to be doing a whole lot on the recursion aspect of things. And lastly, here on our we can just do better package is going to be Kari Zev, Skyship Raider. She's 1 and a red for a legendary creature human pirate, a 1/3 with first strike and menace. It says whenever she attacks, create a legendary 2/1 red monkey creature named Ragavan that's tapped and attacking. Exile that token at the end of combat. She's a beater that doesn't really do it all that effectively, and the menace on her is redundant with our commander.
Yeah, I see why you took out all of these cards. It makes sense since we've upgraded them and did something better. I noticed that you may have been taking off something that's a little more expensive.
I did. I did try to make sure that this deck had at least a little bit of a lower mana curve, especially considering we did also add in a 7-drop, like what I talked about earlier. So I wanted to go ahead and lower the mana cost by removing some of the cards that I just thought, you know what, these are kind of expensive and they are not really super impactful. The first one that I'm going to remove here is Garna, the Blood Flame. She is 3 black and a red for a total of 5. She's a legendary creature human warrior, a 3/3 with flash, and she says whenever she enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn, and other creatures you control have haste. I actually really love the fact that she gives haste, but I'm not super high on the rest of this card. I don't think I want to be holding up 5 mana in a deck like this for me to potentially flash in this card and get the gotcha on my opponents. Kothaped Soul Hoarder is 4 and 2 black for a legendary creature demon. He's a 6/6 with flying. Says whenever a permanent owned by another player is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Although he is big and is a flyer, he's also rather expensive, and I feel like we probably don't need that extra card draw. Traxos, Scourge of Krug, is 4 generic mana for a legendary artifact creature construct. It's a 7/7 with trample. It says whenever it enters battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. It says whenever you cast a historic spell, untap Traxos. Historic spells, by the way, for those of you who maybe don't remember, are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. It's a 4 mana 7/7 that's really not all that great on its own. Lastly, we have Bladewing Deathless Tyrant. This is 5, a black, and a red. It's a legendary creature dragon skeleton, a 6/6 with flying and haste. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, for each creature card in your graveyard, you create a 2/2 black zombie knight creature token with menace. Tokens are cool, and the body on him is also really nice, but paying 7 mana to potentially only make, like, I don't know, a couple of 2/2s, probably not what this deck wants to be doing.
All right, yeah, lowering the curve indeed. I like those drops. I know we've gotten some additional artifacts. So, what are we getting rid of in the artifact category?
So we're going to be dropping 4 artifacts from this deck. And it's not because I necessarily dislike these artifacts, but they're just because, well, number one, I need to make room for other things. The first card here is going to be Gerard's Hourglass Pendant. This is a single generic mana for a legendary artifact. It has flash. It says if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. You can also pay 4, tap it, and exile it. To return to the battlefield tapped, all artifact creatures, enchantments, and land cards put into your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. I don't really understand what the theme of all of this was. There's a lot of recursion that's based on like returning from that turn in this deck, and we're going to be getting a lot of it. I like the fact that this is only a single mana for a legendary artifact, but I do feel like for the most part, the abilities on it really aren't very impactful or relevant for the deck, so we are going to be cutting it.
Yeah, I think Shadow Spear is just better.
Yep. Hero's Blade is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says equipped creature gets +3/+2. Whenever a legendary creature enters battlefield under your control, you may attach Hero's Blade to it, and it's got an equip cost of 4. I'm not super high on equipment to begin with. It doesn't draw us a card, and although the boost in power and toughness is nice, I'm not sold on this card. Bantu's Monument is the final monument that's going to get the boot from this deck. This is the one that managed to cling on the longest. The other two were removed in the $100 upgrade. This is 3 generic mana for a legendary artifact. It says black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is not a piece of ramp. And the reason why I really want to stress that is because our deck runs a ton of creatures that are either white or white and red. So this doesn't really fulfill that ramp role for us. I don't think I want to be including Bantu's Monument. The life gain and drain here is nice, but with the inclusion of the lifelink triggers that we're going to be getting off of some of our newer cards, hopefully we don't need it.
Yeah, I always feel like the monuments are best in monocolor decks.
Absolutely. If you're playing a monocolor deck, they're fantastic. If you're playing a 2-color deck, maybe they make the cut, but anything past that, I think they should probably be removed. Sword of the Chosen is also going to end up getting the axe here, or maybe the sword here. It is 2 generic mana. It's a legendary artifact. You can tap it, and it says target legendary creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. I actually do really like the ability on this card, and this was one that I didn't super like removing from the deck, but we've got to make some room, and this one just happened to be on the chopping block.
Okay, I understand why you took all those artifacts out, but I see that you have just 2 more cards before we get to the lands.
Yeah, so the first card here is going to be Wear and Tear. Wear and Tear is an instant that you can cast. It's got the fuse ability on it, which is weird, and I hate the way that these cards look. But essentially, they're kind of 2 cards in one. You can cast either Wear, or you can cast Tear, or you can cast Wear and Tear from your hand by paying their mana cost. The Wear portion of the card is 1 in a red for an instant that says destroy target artifact. The Tear portion of the card is a single white mana, also for an instant that says destroy target enchantment. Although I do like the flexibility of this card, and it is cheap, which makes it really nice. We did add some removal into the $100 upgrade that can already just hit any permanent. So I felt like these cards were a little bit redundant here, and I wanted to make space for some other legendary creatures. Day of Destiny is also going to be removed here. This is a 3 and a white for a legendary enchantment. It says legendary creatures you control get +2/+2. I actually really, once again, do like this card, and I think if you keep it in the deck, you're probably not making a mistake. At the same time, however, I'm not super sold on it. It was one of the few enchantments that were included in the deck, and I just really wanted to be able to push forward with an additional creature.
That's fair enough. Well, sometimes you just gotta make those sacrifices just to make room for the other stuff that you really wanted. Moving on, we know that we saw the lands being added. What are we removing to make room?
So we are going to be cutting a couple of extra lands here. We're going to be removing one basic mountain and one basic plains from this list. In addition, we're going to be cutting both Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse. With us removing the total number of basic lands in the deck, don't really like Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds, especially considering they kind of cost you a turn. And then Shivan Gorge is the last notable land that we're going to be cutting from this list. This is a legendary land, which I do really like. However, on its own, it can tap for a colorless mana, and that's all the mana that it can generate. In a 3-color deck, I feel like it's really got to do something really impactful in order for it to still make the cut. It does have a second ability on it where you can pay 2 and a red, and you tap it, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent, which is basically flavor text.
Just a little poke.
It is exactly that. Unless your opponent has exactly 1 life, this card does, well, it just doesn't do that.
Alrighty, is that gonna be it?
So that is going to be it. We're still going to be sticking on with that mid-rangey kind of like play our stuff, draw some cards kind of list.
Gotcha. So after adding all these cards, what is your total? We get do we get to 300 or?
So we are just under 300. This list, if my math comes out correctly, is about 285, 286 on TCG Player if we're using the median list. I'm
Cool.
sorry, if we are using the market price. So there is a little bit of extra wiggle room in here if you want to add in maybe another card or two for the land to kind of improve the mana base past that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I know some of these lands get kind of expensive. Maybe someone wants to go add an arid mesa or something like that. But yeah, good job, David. Do you have any final thoughts on the deck as a whole from your $300 list?
As a whole, I think that this deck is probably just kind of generally good. This is a deck that I would more than likely recommend for newer players, especially that $100 list. I think it's a great introduction to the format. It has the potential to be able to win a couple of games while also not really being something that's super complicated. It, for the most part, just kind of relies on creatures and dealing combat damage for you to win. So, pretty easy for somebody to just be able to pick it up, grasp what the deck wants to do, and be able to play with it.
Perfect. And we will be linking your whole entire deck list down in the description below. If you want to check that out, please click the link. It's on Moxfield. And while you're down there, go ahead and leave a comment what you think of this deck by David. Very exciting stuff. Go out and pick up your copy at your local game store of this Legends Legacy. But don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you liked the video. Follow us on our Instagram and Twitter. That is at Guys That Magic. And until the next video, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.
Later.